Hey YouTube, I am going to be reading some things on the subject of women and where their rightful place needs to be, so bear with me. I'm going to start off with Bereshit, or Genesis, chapter 1, verse 26 and 27. And Elohim said, We will make Adam in our image, in our likeness, and he will rule or descend to the abundance of the sea, and the flyers of the skies, and the animals, and all the land, and all the crawlers that crawl on the land. Verse 27. So Elohim filled at the Adam with his image. With the image of Elohim he filled him. Male and female he filled them. And Elohim knelt, verse 28. And Elohim knelt down next to them, and Elohim said to them, Reproduce and increase exceedingly, and fulfill or fill the land and subdue it, and rule in the abundance of the seas, and in the flyers of the skies, and in all the living moving on the earth. Okay, and let me continue just a moment. I have to find it. Chapter 2, verse 15, at least in my reckoning. I'm sure it's a little different in other versions, but I'm doing my own version. So, verse 15, And Yahweh of Elohim said, It is not good for the Adam being by himself. I will make for him a surrounding assistant protector to be face to face to him. I'm going to go into that for a minute. The surrounding assistant protector, that's how I translated Azer, which means companion or opposite corresponding counterpart. And that face to him is to be intimate with. Give me just a moment. My footnote on Azer reads, One who surrounds with aid and or protection. One who gives assistance in times of great difficulty. Used of one, often a superior, who helps another that is in need. A lifesaver. A term used of Yahweh in Devarim or Deuteronomy, chapter 33, verse 26, verse 29, Tehillim, or Psalms, chapter 20, verses 1 to 2, chapter 33, verse 20, chapter 115, verses 9 through 11, chapter 121, verses 1 through 2, and chapter 124, verses 7 through 8. So, that's the term that Yahweh uses for women. You know, I know that in, I think it's the King Jimmy, that a lot of times it's called help meet, which I never understood what the heck that was supposed to be, but really it's like a surrounding assistant protector. So it's someone who's there to give aid in times of need. I found a really interesting book online, Women in the Heart of God, and these are some parts that I extracted from it that I'm just going to read. And I've made like slight edits on it, like instead of Old Testament I put in Tanakh and other things along those lines. Anyways, I'm just going to read. Women in the Tanakh gave their personal belongings as offerings, Exodus 35 verses 22 and 29. Made vows, often involving possessions, Numbers verses 30 verse 9. Chapter 30, verse 9. They were required to make restitution for crimes, Numbers chapter 5, verse 6. Unmarried daughters could inherit property, Numbers chapter 27, verses 1 to 7, and also the Elephantine Papyri, and Job chapter 42, verse 13. Female servants could buy their own freedom, Leviticus chapter 27, verse 1. Receive revenues from the land, 2 Kings chapter 8. Possess nice homes, Micah chapter 2 verse 8. Sell property, Ruth 4 verse 9. Legal rights that women had. Number 1, the Levirate law for a brother to marry his brother's widow is called a duty to her, Genesis chapter 38 verse 8. Number 2, Zelophehad's daughters brought a legal case before Moshe and the elders, Numbers chapter 27. Number 3, they show up as required joint agents with their husbands in a number of settings. Genesis chapter 26 verse 11, 26 verses 34 through 35, 1 Shemuel 14 verse 1. They could buy their freedom like males. Exodus chapter 21 verses 2 to 4. Number 5, they could be witnesses at the gate, even to capital crimes. And that witnesses at the gate is basically like, almost like the courthouse, I think, would be an equivalent. It's Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 18, 22, verse 15, and 25, verse 5. Number 6, widows could initiate property transference transactions at the gate. Deuteronomy 25, verse 5, and Ruth 4, verses 7 through 8. Number 7, women appeared at the gates with the elders. Judges chapter 5, verse 11, Proverbs 8, verses 3 through 4. Spoke for and dominated the group of elders. 2 Samuel 20, verses 21 through 22, and were considered elders and leaders. Isaiah or Yeshayahu, chapter 3, verse 11. Number 8, they had access to the king for grievances. 2 Samuel 14, 2 Kings 8, verse 5, and 1 Kings 3, verse 16. Widows were said to have legal cases. Isaiah or Yeshayahu, chapter 1, verses 16 to 18, and verse 23. And are spoken in terms of justice, rights. Isaiah chapter 10, verse 1. Number 9, the Elephantine Papyri from a Jewish colony in Egypt indicated that at least in the times of Ezra or Nehemiah, women could initiate divorce. Going on. From the sage-like power of the matriarchs, through the wise women of 1 Samuel, through the wisdom woman in Proverbs, through the prophetesses, to the queen mothers, there was tremendous power exerted by women. Women had the ear of kings, and as the main newspaper in Israel, had control of the message of national history. 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 7 to 8. Women of wealth and power are mentioned throughout the text. Example, Miriam, patron of Elisha, Abigail, queen of the south, Esther. Although many powerful Jewish women abused this power and oppressed or exploited the poor. Examples, Amos chapter 4, verse 1, Isaiah chapter 3, verses 11 through 17, and Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 38. Simply stated, access to social and cultural power is not a Judeo-Christian value. Access to servanthood is. Compare the words of Yoshua HaMashiach. Yoshua called them together and said, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must become your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Adam did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Mark chapter 10, verse 42. The final expression of being filled with the Spirit is submitting to one another, because Mashiach is one's master. All the household codes Paul proposes are based on this idea. But although it was customary to call on wives, children, and slaves to submit in various ways, to call all members of a group, including the paterfamilias, the male head of the household, to submit to one another was unheard of, which is what Paul did. First, Paul begins this three-part structure in a very unusual way. As the climax of his exhortations describing a spirit-filled life, Ephesians 5, verses 18 to 21, Paul calls on all believers to submit to one another, Ephesians 5, verse 21. It is true that the following context delineates different ways to submit according to differing societal roles, but the very idea of mutual submission strained the common sense of the term submission. Householders were sometimes called to be sensitive to their wives, children, and slaves, but they were never told to submit to them. That Paul envisions the same sort of mutual submission to cover the slave and master relationship is clear from his exhortation in Ephesians 6, verse 9. After explaining how and why slaves should submit, Ephesians 6, 5 through 8, he calls on masters to do the same thing to them, an idea which, if pressed literally, goes beyond virtually all other extant writers from antiquity. I'm going to stop there because my time is up, but I'm going to continue in the next video, so see you then. Thank you and goodbye.